Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her medical kit one final time as the helicopter's rotors thundered overhead. The other passengers, 6 elite Navy SEALs, barely glanced at her as she checked her supplies. To them, she was just another military nurse being transported to the forward operating base in Afghanistan's hostile Kunar province. They had no idea that beneath her calm exterior and medical credentials lay one of the most dangerous women the military had ever trained. The lead SEAL, Staff Sergeant Mike Reynolds, looked across the helicopter cabin at Sarah. She appeared ordinary enough. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the quiet confidence that came with years of medical training. Her uniform bore the standard medical corps insignia, and her gear consisted of what any field medic would carry into a war zone. Nothing about her suggested she was anything more than what her paperwork indicated: an experienced trauma nurse with multiple deployments under her belt. What Reynolds and his team didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had spent the last 8 years living a carefully constructed double life. On the surface, she was indeed a highly skilled military nurse with an impeccable record of saving lives under fire. Her medical credentials were real, her training legitimate, and her dedication to healing wounded soldiers absolutely genuine. But hidden beneath layers of classified documents and need-to-know clearances was another identity entirely. Sarah was a graduate of one of the military's most secretive programs, a joint operation between Special Forces and military intelligence that trained operatives to function as perfect sleeper agents within regular military units. The program, known only by its code designation Nightingale, took exceptional individuals with genuine medical training and transformed them into lethal weapons capable of operating undetected for years. The selection process for Nightingale had been brutal. Out of nearly 300 candidates initially screened, only 12 had made it through the first round of psychological evaluations. The program required individuals who could compartmentalize their lives completely, people who could genuinely care for patients and save lives while simultaneously maintaining the cold precision necessary for elimination missions. Sarah had been recruited during her second year of nursing school, not because she showed any particular inclination toward violence, but because psychological profiles indicated she possessed an unusual combination of empathy and emotional control. She could watch a fellow soldier die on her operating table and feel genuine grief, then turn around and methodically plan the elimination of enemy targets, without the two experiences interfering with each other. The training had taken place at a facility that officially didn't exist, buried in the mountains of Colorado. For 18 months, Sarah had learned skills that would have impressed even the SEALs sitting across from her. Hand-to-hand combat techniques that could kill or incapacitate in seconds. Marksmanship training that had her placing shots with sniper-level accuracy using any weapon she could get her hands on. Explosives training that taught her to create devastating devices from common medical supplies. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned the art of misdirection. How to maintain her cover identity so perfectly that even trained observers would see only what she wanted them to see. How to hide weapons and equipment in plain sight. How to use her medical knowledge not just to save lives, but to end them when necessary. The helicopter began its descent toward the remote outpost, and Sarah could see the rugged mountain terrain that had been claiming American lives for months. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces had been using the area as a staging ground for attacks on coalition convoys. The outpost itself was barely more than a collection of reinforced buildings and defensive positions carved into the mountainside. Reynolds briefed his team one final time as they prepared to land. Their mission was to establish a perimeter around the medical facility, while Sarah and the other medical personnel set up a forward aid station. It was supposed to be a routine operation, the kind of mission these SEALs had executed dozens of times before. As they touched down, Sarah gathered her medical supplies and followed the team toward the main compound. The outpost commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, met them at the landing zone. He was a weathered officer in his 40s who had been running operations in this sector for nearly a year. "Welcome to Firebase Viper," Harrison said, his voice barely audible over the dying whine of the helicopter engines. "I hope you brought plenty of medical supplies because we've been taking casualties all week." Sarah nodded professionally. "I'm prepared for whatever you need, Colonel. Where do you want me to set up?" Harrison gestured toward a reinforced building near the center of the compound. "Medical Bay is in Building 3. We've got power and running water, but don't count on either staying reliable if things get hot." As they walked toward the medical facility, Harrison continued his briefing. "Taliban activity has been increasing steadily over the past month. We think they're planning something big, but we can't figure out what. Our patrols keep running into small groups of fighters, but nothing that suggests a major offensive." What Harrison didn't mention, and what Sarah already knew from her classified briefings, was that intelligence sources had identified this outpost as the target of an imminent large-scale attack. The Taliban had been moving weapons and personnel into the area for weeks, preparing for an assault designed to capture or destroy the facility and execute any American personnel they could take alive. Sarah's real mission wasn't to provide medical support for routine operations. She was here because intelligence analysts believed the attack would come within the next 72 hours, and her handlers wanted someone with her unique skill set in position when it happened. The medical bay turned out to be better equipped than she had expected. Modern surgical equipment, adequate lighting, and enough supplies to handle mass casualties. Sarah began unpacking her gear, carefully placing certain items in specific locations that would give her quick access if she needed to shift from her medical role to her other identity. Over the next several hours, she fell into the familiar rhythm of military medicine, treating minor injuries from patrol activities, conducting routine health checks, and maintaining equipment. To everyone around her, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, a dedicated nurse doing her job with quiet competence. But even as she worked, Sarah was conducting her own reconnaissance of the facility. She noted sight lines, defensive positions, and potential choke points. She identified locations where weapons and ammunition were stored. She memorized the layout of every building and calculated fields of fire from various positions. Most importantly, she began to assess the personnel around her. Reynolds and his SEAL team were clearly capable operators, but they numbered only 6 against what intelligence suggested could be overwhelming odds. The regular Army personnel manning the outpost were competent, but not elite fighters. If her briefings were accurate, they would all be facing a force of nearly 200 Taliban fighters within the next day or two. As evening fell, Sarah found herself eating dinner with Reynolds and his team in the facility's small mess hall. The conversation was typical military banter, complaints about the food, speculation about when they might rotate back to base, and good-natured ribbing between teammates. "So, Doc," Reynolds said, using the informal title that many combat soldiers applied to medical personnel, "how many deployments is this for you?" "This is my 4th," Sarah replied, which was true if you only counted her documented assignments. "Started in Iraq back in 2018, then 2 tours in Syria before this." "Must have seen some serious action," observed Petty Officer First Class Tony Garcia, the team's explosives specialist. "Medical folks in those theaters earned their hazard pay," Sarah smiled. "I've had my moments, but mostly it's just trying to keep people alive long enough to get them to proper surgical facilities." What she didn't mention was that during her previous deployments, she had eliminated 17 enemy combatants in situations where her medical cover allowed her to get close to high-value targets. Her handlers considered her one of their most successful assets, primarily because no one ever suspected the quiet nurse of being anything other than what she appeared to be. As the evening wore on, Sarah excused herself and returned to the medical bay. She had work to do that had nothing to do with treating patients. Using equipment hidden in her medical supplies, she established secure communication with her handlers and received a final briefing on what intelligence expected in the coming hours. The news wasn't good. Intercepted communications suggested that the Taliban assault would begin before dawn, with the attackers approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. The enemy force had been confirmed at just over 200 fighters, including several dozen with significant combat experience against coalition forces. More troubling was intelligence suggesting that this wasn't just a typical Taliban raid. The attack appeared to be coordinated with foreign advisors, possibly Russian or Iranian special operations personnel who had been training local fighters in advanced tactics. Sarah acknowledged the briefing and prepared for what was coming. She moved through the medical bay, ostensibly conducting routine maintenance on equipment while actually positioning weapons and ammunition where she could access them quickly. To any observer, she was simply a conscientious nurse preparing for potential casualties. But hidden beneath surgical supplies and medical equipment were items that would have surprised even the SEALs. Modified assault rifles with custom suppressors, specialized ammunition designed for maximum stopping power, and small explosive devices that could be deployed with medical precision. As she completed her preparations, Sarah allowed herself a moment to consider what the next day might bring. She had been trained for this type of situation, but theoretical preparation was different from facing nearly impossible odds with American lives, depending on her ability to maintain her cover while simultaneously becoming a weapon of mass destruction. The irony wasn't lost on her. Tomorrow, she might very well save lives with one hand while taking them with the other, switching between healer and killer with the kind of fluid precision that her training had made second nature. The SEALs sleeping nearby had no idea that their quiet nurse was about to become their most lethal asset in a fight for survival that would test every skill she had learned in 8 years of living 2 lives. Outside, the mountain wind carried sounds that might have been wildlife, or might have been something else entirely. Sarah checked her watch and settled in to wait for whatever dawn would bring. In a few hours, everyone at Firebase Viper would discover just how wrong they had been about the capabilities of their military nurse. The first rocket-propelled grenade struck the compound's eastern wall at 0347 hours, sending concrete and steel fragments screaming through the early morning darkness. Sarah Martinez was already awake, having felt the subtle change in atmospheric pressure that experienced soldiers learn to recognize seconds before incoming fire arrives. She was fully dressed and moving toward her equipment before the explosion's echo faded across the mountain peaks. General Quarters alarms began wailing throughout Firebase Viper as more explosions erupted around the perimeter. Through the medical bay's reinforced windows, Sarah could see muzzle flashes flickering like deadly stars across the surrounding ridgelines. The Taliban assault was beginning exactly as intelligence had predicted, but seeing it unfold in real time was different from reading briefing documents. Reynolds and his SEAL team were already responding with the practiced efficiency that had kept them alive through multiple combat deployments. Sarah could hear them coordinating defensive positions over the facility's communication system as regular Army personnel scrambled to man their assigned posts. "All units, this is Overwatch," Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through the speakers. "We're taking coordinated fire from elevated positions on 3 sides. Enemy strength appears to be significantly larger than previous attacks. All medical personnel report to your designated safe areas immediately." Sarah ignored the directive entirely. Instead, she began what appeared to be routine preparation for mass casualties, laying out surgical instruments, checking blood supplies, and testing equipment. But her real focus was on the specialized gear she had hidden throughout the medical bay during the previous evening. The attacking force was larger and better organized than anything the outpost had faced before. Through her medical bay windows, Sarah could see coordinated movement patterns that suggested professional military training rather than typical insurgent tactics. These weren't local fighters conducting hit-and-run raids. This was a planned assault designed to overwhelm the facility's defenses through superior numbers and firepower. More concerning was the tactical sophistication she observed. The attackers had positioned support weapons to create interlocking fields of fire that made movement between buildings extremely dangerous. They were using suppressive fire to pin down the American defenders while other teams moved to assault positions. Within minutes of the attack's beginning, the first casualties began arriving at the medical bay. 2 soldiers from the eastern defensive position had been caught by fragments from the initial RPG strike. Sarah switched seamlessly into her medical role, working to stabilize their injuries while continuously monitoring the tactical situation through the facility's communication network. "Doc, we need you to stay put," Reynolds called over the radio from his position near the main gate. "This is looking like a major assault, and we're going to have more wounded coming your way." "Understood," Sarah replied, applying pressure dressings to a soldier's shrapnel wounds while mentally calculating angles of fire and enemy approach routes. "Medical bay is secure and ready for casualties." But even as she worked to save lives, Sarah was conducting her own tactical assessment. The attacking force had achieved tactical surprise and was pressing their numerical advantage effectively. The outpost's defenders were skilled and well-positioned, but they were facing odds of more than 20-1 against an enemy that had clearly planned this assault carefully. More troubling was intelligence chatter she was monitoring through her hidden communication equipment. The Taliban commanders weren't just trying to overrun the facility, they were specifically attempting to capture high-value targets for propaganda purposes. That meant they would be trying to take prisoners rather than simply eliminating the American presence. As dawn began to break over the mountains, the true scope of the assault became visible. Sarah could see enemy fighters positioned across the ridgelines in numbers that far exceeded the intelligence estimates. They had established fire bases at multiple elevations, creating a tactical situation that would be extremely difficult for conventional forces to overcome. The facility's defensive positions were being systematically suppressed by coordinated fire from heavy weapons. Several of the outposts' defensive positions had already gone silent, their occupants either killed or forced to abandon their posts under overwhelming fire. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice came over the communication system with increasing urgency. "All units, we're being flanked on the northern approach. Enemy forces have breached the outer perimeter and are moving toward the main compound. All available personnel prepare for close-quarters combat." Sarah finished treating the wounded soldiers and made a decision that would have surprised everyone who thought they knew her. She activated a concealed communication device and sent a brief coded message to her handlers. "Nightingale authorization requested for immediate tactical intervention." The response came back within seconds. "Authorization granted. Execute at your discretion." For 8 years, Sarah Martinez had lived 2 lives simultaneously. Now those lives were about to merge in a way that would either save Firebase Viper or expose her true identity to consequences she couldn't predict. She moved through the medical bay with practiced efficiency, but instead of preparing for more casualties, she began retrieving weapons and equipment from their concealment points. The transformation was remarkable. Within minutes, the quiet military nurse had armed herself with weapons that most infantry soldiers would have envied. A modified M4 carbine with custom optics and suppressor, a sidearm specially designed for close-quarters combat, specialized ammunition that could penetrate body armor at extended ranges, small explosive devices that could be deployed with surgical precision. But more than the equipment, it was Sarah herself who had changed. Her posture, her movement patterns, even her facial expression had shifted from the careful competence of a medical professional to the predatory focus of an apex predator. The woman who had been saving lives minutes earlier was now preparing to take them with the same systematic precision. Sarah checked her equipment one final time and moved toward the medical bay's rear exit. The attacking Taliban forces had no idea they were about to encounter someone whose capabilities far exceeded anything they had planned for. Their tactical intelligence had identified Firebase Viper's defensive capabilities accurately, but they had no information about the weapon that had been hidden in plain sight among the medical personnel. The first group of enemy fighters she encountered had just breached the facility's northern perimeter and were moving toward the main compound. 6 Taliban fighters armed with assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, advancing with the confidence that came from overwhelming tactical advantage. They never saw her coming. Sarah's first shots took down the lead fighters before they could react to her presence. The suppressed rifle made almost no sound, and her targets dropped so quickly that the remaining attackers needed several crucial seconds to understand what was happening. By then, it was far too late for any of them to respond effectively. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. 6 enemy fighters eliminated with precision that would have impressed even veteran snipers. But more importantly, Sarah had done it in a way that made it appear the defenders had simply gotten lucky with a well-placed defensive position. No one observing the scene would suspect that a single individual had been responsible for the tactical success. She moved quickly to her next position, using her knowledge of the facility's layout to approach enemy forces from angles they hadn't expected. The Taliban assault plan had been based on the assumption that they were facing conventional military defenders operating from fixed positions. They had no contingency for dealing with a highly trained individual who could move freely throughout their formation while remaining effectively invisible. Her second engagement targeted a support weapons team that had been providing covering fire for the main assault. Sarah eliminated the crew of a heavy machine gun position with the same clinical precision she had used in her medical training. Each shot was placed exactly where it needed to be for maximum effect with minimum ammunition expenditure. But even as she moved through her tactical objectives, Sarah maintained her medical cover identity. Anyone who happened to observe her activities would see only brief glimpses of someone who appeared to be moving between defensive positions to provide medical support. Her movements were planned to avoid extended observation by friendly forces who might question what they were seeing. The Taliban commanders began to notice that their assault was meeting more resistance than expected. Support positions were going silent without explanation. Assault teams were taking casualties from unexpected directions. The carefully planned attack was beginning to encounter problems that didn't match their intelligence assessments. Sarah continued moving through the compound, engaging enemy forces with a combination of precision marksmanship and small explosive devices that created tactical advantages for the regular defenders. Her actions were coordinated to appear like successful defensive operations rather than the work of a single individual. The psychological impact on the attacking force was becoming apparent. Taliban fighters who had been advancing with confidence were beginning to show signs of confusion and hesitation. Their tactical momentum was being disrupted by casualties and failed objectives they couldn't explain. Reynolds and his SEAL team were fighting with characteristic skill from their positions near the main gate, but they were beginning to notice unusual patterns in the battle's development. Enemy positions that should have been problematic for the defenders were going silent unexpectedly. Assault teams that should have reached their objectives were being found eliminated with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Overwatch. "This is Alpha Team," Reynolds called over the communication system. "We're seeing some unusual tactical developments. Enemy casualties are higher than expected, and their assault coordination is breaking down." "Copy that, Alpha Team," Harrison replied. "Whatever's causing it, keep doing it. We need every advantage we can get." What neither Reynolds nor Harrison realized was that their quiet military nurse had just eliminated her 20th enemy combatant in less than 8 minutes, and she was nowhere near finished with her tactical objectives. The Taliban assault that had been planned to overwhelm Firebase Viper through superior numbers was about to encounter a level of resistance that would become the subject of classified intelligence reports for years to come. The Taliban assault commander realized something was catastrophically wrong with his carefully planned attack when his third support weapons team failed to respond to radio calls. What should have been a textbook operation to overwhelm the American outpost was turning into a nightmare of unexplained casualties and tactical failures. From his position on the eastern ridgeline, he could see that enemy resistance was far more effective than intelligence had suggested possible. Sarah Martinez moved through the compound like a ghost, exploiting every piece of cover and concealment as she systematically dismantled the attacking force. Her medical training had taught her anatomy with precision that now served a very different purpose. Every shot was placed for maximum physiological effect, ensuring that wounded enemies would require immediate attention from their comrades rather than continuing to fight. The transformation in her tactical approach had been complete. Where moments earlier she had been a healing presence saving American lives, she was now a weapon of surgical precision, eliminating threats with cold efficiency. But even as she moved between engagements, part of her mind remained focused on maintaining her medical cover identity. Between tactical movements, she made brief appearances at locations where friendly forces could observe her, always carrying medical supplies and moving in patterns consistent with someone providing battlefield medical support. To the defenders of Firebase Viper, their nurse appeared to be courageously moving between positions to treat wounded personnel under fire. The reality was far different and far more lethal. Sarah's fourth major engagement targeted the Taliban's command and control element that had positioned itself near the compound's southwestern approach. The enemy commanders had established their position based on the assumption that American forces would be focused on defending fixed positions. They hadn't considered the possibility of offensive operations originating from within the facility itself. She approached the command position using a route that took her through terrain the Taliban had already cleared, meaning they weren't watching for threats from that direction. Her medical knowledge proved invaluable as she moved through areas where wounded enemy fighters had been left behind. To any observer, she appeared to be checking on casualties, but she was actually gathering intelligence on enemy positions and weaknesses. The command team consisted of 6 fighters, including what appeared to be a foreign advisor, whose tactical communication suggested professional military training. Sarah observed their positions for nearly 3 minutes, identifying each individual's role and planning an engagement sequence that would eliminate the entire team before they could coordinate a response. When she moved, it was with the same precise timing she used in emergency medical procedures. The foreign advisor was her first target, followed immediately by the radio operator and the team leader. The remaining fighters were eliminated before they could effectively return fire or call for assistance. The psychological impact of losing their command element rippled through the entire Taliban assault force. Coordinated attacks began breaking down into confused individual initiatives. Support weapons that had been providing covering fire fell silent as their operators focused on immediate threats they couldn't identify or locate. Reynolds and his SEAL team were beginning to notice patterns that didn't match their tactical training or experience. Enemy forces were taking casualties from directions that should have been impossible given the compound's defensive layout. More puzzling, the casualties showed precision that suggested professional military training far beyond what the outpost's defenders should have been capable of achieving. Alpha Team, this is Bravo, Petty Officer Garcia called from his position near the vehicle maintenance area. I'm seeing enemy casualties that don't match our fire patterns. Someone's out there doing work that we're not responsible for. Copy that, Bravo, Reynolds replied. I'm seeing the same thing from my position. Whatever's happening, it's working in our favor. What Reynolds couldn't have known was that their military nurse had just completed her 5th major engagement and was moving toward a target that would fundamentally change the tactical situation. Sarah had identified the location where the Taliban forces had positioned their heavy weapons, mortars and recoilless rifles that were providing the indirect fire support, making life miserable for the American defenders. The weapons position was heavily defended and located in terrain that conventional assault tactics couldn't reach without sustaining massive casualties. But Sarah's approach wasn't conventional by any definition. Using her medical supplies as camouflage, she moved through areas where enemy forces expected to see medical personnel attending to their wounded. Her disguise was so effective that she actually passed within a few meters of enemy security positions without being challenged. To Taliban, fighters focused on watching for American military threats. A woman carrying medical supplies didn't register as a tactical concern. The heavy weapons position contained the firepower that was keeping American defenders pinned down and preventing them from mounting effective counterattacks. Eliminating these weapons would fundamentally shift the tactical balance, but it required getting close enough to place explosive charges with medical precision. Sarah spent nearly 4 minutes positioning small explosive devices around the weapons and ammunition storage areas. The charges were designed to create a chain reaction that would destroy the entire position while appearing to be the result of lucky American indirect fire. To any investigation after the battle, it would look like outstanding marksmanship rather than sabotage from within enemy lines. When the explosions erupted, the psychological impact on the Taliban assault force was immediate and devastating. Their heavy fire support disappeared in a series of secondary explosions that could be heard throughout the valley. More importantly, the loss of indirect fire capability meant American defenders could begin moving freely between defensive positions for the first time since the attack began. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice came over the communication system with obvious relief. All units, enemy indirect fire has ceased. Repeat. Indirect fire has ceased. All defensive teams prepare for coordinated counterattack operations. But Sarah wasn't finished with her tactical objectives. The Taliban assault force still numbered over 150 fighters, and they were beginning to regroup after the shock of losing their command and heavy weapons support. She had approximately 4 minutes before they would reorganize sufficiently to renew their assault with modified tactics. Her final series of engagements targeted the remaining enemy support elements that were providing tactical coordination for the assault teams. These were experienced fighters whose elimination would leave the remaining Taliban forces without effective leadership or coordination capability. Moving with speed that prioritized tactical effect over personal safety, Sarah engaged 3 separate enemy positions in rapid succession. Her ammunition expenditure was carefully calculated. Never enough shots from any single location to draw effective return fire, but sufficient to eliminate tactical threats with surgical precision. The first position contained a mortar team that had been attempting to provide close fire support for assault teams moving toward the main compound. Sarah eliminated the entire crew with shots that appeared to come from American defensive positions rather than from within enemy territory. The second engagement targeted a communication relay team that had been coordinating movement between separated Taliban units. Without their radio coordination, the assault teams would be unable to synchronize their attacks or respond effectively to changing tactical situations. Her final engagement was the most dangerous and the most crucial. A team of experienced fighters had established an overwatch position that was preventing American forces from moving to more effective defensive positions. Eliminating this position would allow the SEALs and regular Army defenders to take offensive action for the first time since the battle began. Sarah approached the position from a direction the enemy couldn't have anticipated. Through terrain they had already secured and weren't monitoring for threats. Her final shots of the engagement eliminated 6 fighters whose tactical skills had been keeping nearly 30 American defenders pinned down in defensive positions. When the Overwatch position went silent, the tactical situation at Firebase Viper changed completely. For the first time since the assault began, American forces had the initiative and the freedom of movement necessary to exploit it. Reynolds and his SEAL team immediately recognized the opportunity and began coordinating counterattack operations that would have been impossible minutes earlier. The Taliban assault force, now without command, control, heavy weapons, or Overwatch support, began showing signs of tactical collapse. "All units, this is Alpha Team. Reynolds announced over the communication system. Enemy tactical coordination has broken down completely. We're going to offensive operations to exploit the situation. What followed was a masterclass in how professional military units respond when given tactical advantages they hadn't expected. The SEAL team moved with precision that turned the Taliban assault into a rout, while regular Army defenders provided supporting fire from positions they could finally occupy safely. Sarah used the chaos of the counterattack to return to the medical bay, where she resumed her role as military nurse with the same seamless professionalism she had shown throughout her double life. When the first American wounded arrived for treatment, injuries sustained during the counterattack rather than the original defense, she was ready with medical equipment and the quiet competence everyone expected from their nurse. The battle lasted 12 more minutes after Sarah completed her tactical interventions, but the outcome was never in doubt once American forces gained the initiative. The Taliban assault force, which had numbered over 200 fighters at the beginning of the attack, retreated in complete disorder with casualties that intelligence analysts would later determine exceeded 60% of their original strength. Reynolds and his team secured the perimeter and began conducting battle damage assessment, but they were puzzled by evidence that didn't match their tactical understanding of what had occurred. Enemy casualties showed precision and tactical sophistication that seemed impossible given the defensive situation they remembered fighting through. "Doc," Reynolds called as he entered the medical bay, where Sarah was treating wounded soldiers. "Did you see anything unusual during the attack? We're finding enemy casualties that don't match our fire patterns." Sarah looked up from the soldier she was treating, her expression showing nothing more than the focused concern of a medical professional. "I was pretty busy in here taking care of wounded," she replied, "but I heard a lot of explosions that sounded different from incoming fire." "Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out," Reynolds said. "Someone was doing outstanding work out there, but we can't determine who." What Reynolds never discovered, and what Sarah would never tell him, was that their quiet military nurse had single-handedly eliminated 51 enemy combatants in 12 minutes of tactical operations that would be studied by special operations analysts for years to come. Her actions had saved not only Firebase Viper, but the lives of every American defender who would have been killed if the Taliban assault had succeeded. The after-action reports would credit outstanding defensive coordination and exceptional marksmanship for the tactical victory. Intelligence analysts would puzzle over Taliban tactical failures that seemed inconsistent with their usual operational capabilities. But the truth about what had really happened would remain classified at levels that ensured it would never become part of the official record. Sarah Martinez returned to her medical duties with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown, treating wounded Americans and even providing medical care for captured enemy fighters. To everyone around her, she remained exactly what she had always appeared to be, a dedicated military nurse who happened to have been present during an exceptional tactical victory. The SEALs who had shared that helicopter ride into Firebase Viper would never learn that their assumptions about the quiet nurse had been completely wrong. They would never discover that the most lethal individual in the entire engagement had been sitting across from them, checking medical supplies and maintaining the perfect cover identity that had kept her true capabilities hidden for 8 years of military service. But sometimes, late at night, when Sarah was alone in the medical bay, she would allow herself a small smile as she remembered the 12 minutes when her 2 lives had merged into something that saved the lives of 37 American service members who never knew they owed their survival to the nurse they barely noticed.